All right, so, uh, this book, Before the Coffee Gets Cold, I've seen it around. It's one of those that you hear about and you're not quite sure what to make of it.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely gotten some buzz, but there are very mixed feelings on it online. Some people love it, some hate it.
So that's what we're going to deep dive into today. We'll try to figure out who it's for, who should read it, and who should probably just skip it and move on to something else.
And you know what? I think the best way to start is by just saying outright that if you're looking for a fast-paced, like really plot-heavy book,
Yeah,
this is not it. This is not that kind of book.
right. So if you're looking for like car chases and explosions
Yeah.
and stuff,
Yeah, you're going to want to go somewhere else.
yeah, you're in the wrong place for
But,
sure.
but if you're in the mood for something a little bit quieter, something a little more thoughtful, a little more character-driven, this might be the book for you.
Okay, all right. So tell me a little bit more about that then. What is it about this book that's so, I don't know, what's the word? Like introspective.
Mhm.
Is that a good word for it?
Yeah, I think that's a good word for it. I mean, it's really about the characters and their relationships and sort of their emotional journeys.
So it's not really a plot-driven book at all.
Not really. I mean, there is a plot, but it's not the main focus. The main
Well,
focus is on these four different characters, and each of them has their own story. And all of the stories take place in this one little cafe in Tokyo, and each of them involves some element of time travel.
okay, now see, time travel. Now that's interesting. Now I'm listening.
Yeah, but there are rules.
Oh, there are always rules with time travel, aren't there?
Right, exactly. Always rules. And in this case, the rules are pretty strict. So, for example, you can only travel back to a specific point in the cafe's past. You can't just go hopping around through history.
So no dinosaurs, huh?
No, sorry, no dinosaurs.
Yep.
And you can't leave the cafe while you're in the past. So you're basically just stuck in this one little room.
Okay, so that's already pretty limited, I'm seeing. What else? What other rules are there?
Well, you have to come back to the present before your coffee gets cold, hence the title.
Ah, okay. Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Clever.
And this is the big one, the one that everyone always gets hung up on. You absolutely cannot change the present, no matter what you do in the past.
So what's the point? If you can't change anything, why even go back? It just seems kind of pointless, doesn't it?
That's a question that a lot of people have. And it's one of the things that makes the book so interesting, I think. It forces you to think about, like, why we're so fascinated with time travel in the first place. You know, is it always about fixing mistakes or changing outcomes? Or could it be about something else entirely? Like, maybe it's about finding closure or saying things that you never got to say. Or maybe it's just about seeing the past from a new perspective.
Okay, I see where you're going with that.
Yeah.
So you're saying it's more about the emotional journey than it is about actually, like, changing the course of history or anything like that.
Exactly. The author, his name is Toshikazu Kawaguchi. He's really good at exploring those kind of like quiet human moments of, regret and longing and love. Like, for example, there's one story in the book where a woman travels back in time to have one last conversation with her mother, who's suffering from dementia.
Oh, wow.
And she knows she can't change her mother's condition, but the act of going back and having that final conversation, it gives her a sense of peace and understanding.
Yeah, that's really powerful.
Yeah.
And you're right. It does make you think about time travel in a different way. Like maybe it's not always about fixing things or changing things. Maybe it's just about making peace with the past.
Right, exactly. And that's something that this book does really well. It kind of makes you rethink your whole perspective on time travel and what it means to go back and revisit the past.
Okay, so I'm intrigued. But I have to admit, when I first heard about this book, I was a little skeptical. I thought it was going to be one of those like super sentimental, overly emotional kind of stories. And those can be good sometimes, but they can also be a little much.
Yeah.
So is this book like that? Is it one of those like tearjerker kind of books?
I mean, it can be emotional for sure,
Yeah.
but it's not overly sentimental, I don't think. It's more like it's just very human. The characters feel real and their emotions feel real. And the way that Kawaguchi writes, it's very simple and straightforward, but it's also very powerful. He doesn't need to use a lot of flowery language or anything like that to get his point across.
It's interesting that you mentioned that about his writing style. I was actually curious about that because I know that he's actually a playwright originally, right?
Yeah, that's right. He wrote for the stage before he started writing novels.
So does that influence his writing style at all? Do you see any of that theatrical background in his writing.
Oh, absolutely. The whole book is very dialogue-driven, almost like you're watching a play unfold on the page.
Yeah.
And there's a real focus on capturing the nuances of human interaction, like the way people talk to each other, the things they say, the things they don't say, all of that. It's very carefully crafted.
Hmm, that's fascinating. So it's almost like you're eavesdropping on these really intimate conversations.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
you're a fly on the wall in this little cafe listening in on these people's lives.
I like that. I mean, I'm starting to see why this book has resonated with so many people. It sounds like a really unique reading experience.
It is. It's definitely not your typical time travel story. But that's what makes it so special, I think. It's something different, something a little bit quieter, a little bit more introspective. And for the right reader, I think it can be a really powerful and moving experience.
Okay, well, you've definitely piqued my interest. I'm starting to think maybe I should give this book a try.
I think you should. But I will say, it's not for everyone. Like we said before, if you're looking for a fast-paced, action-packed story, you're going to be disappointed.
Hmm.
But if you're in the mood for something a little bit different, something that will make you think and feel, then I think you'll really enjoy it.
All right, well, you've convinced me I'm sold. But before I rush off to the bookstore, I do have one more question for you. Are there any other books out there that are similar to Before the Coffee Gets Cold? For those of us who might be looking for more of that same kind of vibe.
That's a great question. And you know what? It's actually really hard to find books that are directly comparable because Before the Coffee Gets Cold is such a unique book.
Yeah.
But there are a few books that come to mind that have a similar kind of feel, a similar kind of atmosphere. Like, for example, have you ever read Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto?
I haven't. Actually, I've heard of it, but I've never gotten around to reading it.
You should check it out.
Yeah.
It's also a very quiet, contemplative book. It's set in Japan as well, and it deals with themes of loss and family and finding connection in unexpected places. But it's more grounded in reality. There's no time travel or anything like that.
Okay, so it's more like a slice of life kind of story.
Exactly. And the writing style is very similar to Kawaguchi's. It's very spare and poetic, and it really captures the beauty of everyday moments.
That sounds really interesting. I'll have to add that to my list.
You should. And then another book that comes to mind is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. Have you read that one?
Oh, yeah, I love The Midnight Library. It was such a thought-provoking book.
Right. It's a great book. And it also deals with themes of regret and second chances, but it takes a very different approach than Before the Coffee Gets Cold in The Midnight Library. The main character gets to explore all these different alternate realities, all the different paths her life could have taken.
And I love how each of those realities was like a different genre of book, almost.
Totally. It was so clever. But Before the Coffee Gets Cold is much more focused. It's really just about these four characters and their individual stories. And the time travel element is much more limited. You can't really change anything. You're just kind of revisiting the past like we were talking about before.
So it's more about the emotional impact of those moments than it is about the actual, mechanics of time travel or anything like that.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so unique, I think. It's a time travel story that's not really about time travel at all. It's about something much deeper than that. It's about human connection and loss and regret and the things that make us who we are.
That's a beautiful way to put it. I think you've officially sold me on this book.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to have to check it out.
I'm glad to hear it, and I think you'll really enjoy it. But like I said, it's not for everyone. It's a quiet book, a thoughtful book, and it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea.
Okay, so for those of us who are looking for something a little bit different, something that's going to stay with us long after we finish the last page, Before the Coffee Gets Cold, might just be the perfect book.
I think so. And you know what? I think it's the kind of book that you can read over and over again, and each time you'll find something new in it.
I love books like that. The ones that keep on giving.
Exactly. And I think this is one of those books. It's a book that will make you think, it will make you feel, and it will stay with you long after you've finished reading it.
All right, well, I'm convinced I'm adding this one to the top of my to-be-read pile. And for those of you listening at home, if you're looking for a book that's a little bit different, a little bit special, then I highly recommend checking out Before the Coffee Gets Cold. It might just be the perfect book for a quiet evening in.
It just might be.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Before the Coffee Gets Cold.
And until next time, happy reading.
Yeah, so it's like the Midnight Library. You have so many choices. You can go anywhere, do anything.
Right, exactly. You have infinite possibilities. But in Before the Coffee Gets Cold, it's very contained.
Yeah, it's almost the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the things that I find so appealing about it, actually,
Hmm.
because it forces you to really focus on the specific moment, the specific relationship, and to kind of like wring all the emotion out of it, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, I get that.
Because sometimes I think when we have too many choices, it can be kind of overwhelming.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's like that paradox of choice thing, right?
Exactly. Too many options, you end up just freezing up and not making any decision at all.
So maybe that's part of the appeal of this book. It's like it gives you this very specific, very limited scenario.
Yeah.
And it says, okay, what are you going to do with it?
Right, and I think that's what makes it so emotionally resonant, too, because it's like these characters, they're not trying to change the world or anything like that.
Yeah.
They're just trying to make peace with their own past, to connect with the people they love, to find some kind of closure or understanding.
Hmm. It's interesting because when you put it like that, it makes it sound almost like therapeutic, you know?
It is kind of therapeutic, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
it's not about rewriting history, but it's about processing it, coming to terms with it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to, whether or not they're into time travel stories.
For sure. I mean, we all have regrets. We all have things we wish we could go back and
Oh,
change.
yeah, absolutely.
But this book kind of offers this different perspective. Like, maybe it's not about changing the past. Maybe it's about making peace with it.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe that's enough.
Maybe that's enough.
So for our listeners out there, the ones who are on the fence about this book, I mean, it does sound like a pretty unique reading experience. What do you say?
Oh, for sure. It's definitely not like anything else I've ever read.
So what would you say to someone who's trying to decide whether or not to pick it up? Like, how would you convince them that it's worth their time?
I would say that if you're looking for a book that will make you think and feel, that will stay with you long after you've finished reading it, then this is definitely a book worth checking out. It's a quiet book, a thoughtful book, but it's also a very powerful book.
So it's not necessarily a light read,
No, it's not a light read.
but it's a rewarding one, you're saying.
I think so, yeah. For the right reader, it can be a very rewarding experience.
Hmm.
But like I said, it's not for everyone. If you're looking for something fast-paced and action-packed, this is not the book for you.
Yeah, this is definitely more of a slow burn.
Yeah, for sure. But I think that's part of its charm, you know?
Yeah.
It's like a cup of coffee on a rainy day. It's warm, it's comforting, and it makes you feel good.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe this is the perfect book for like a cozy weekend afternoon, curled up on the couch with a blanket and a cup of tea.
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sold. I'm definitely adding this to my to-be-read list.
Mm-hmm.
But before we move on, I do have one more question for you. You mentioned earlier that this is actually the first book in a series, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's a first book in a 4-book series.
Okay, so for someone who's thinking about picking up Before the Coffee Gets Cold,
Mhm.
do they need to commit to reading the whole series? Or can they just read this one and be satisfied?
That's a good question. And I think the answer is that you can definitely just read this one and be satisfied. Each book in the series is kind of its own standalone story, so you don't necessarily need to read them all in order to understand what's going on.
Okay, so it's not like a traditional series where there's like an overarching plot that spans all the books.
No, not really. Each book has its own set of characters and its own storyline.
Okay, so it's more like they're all set in the same world, but they're not directly connected to each other, plot-wise.
Yeah, exactly. And they all revolve around the same cafe and the same time-traveling ability.
Right,
All
right. Okay, so that makes sense. So for someone who's maybe a little hesitant to commit to a whole series, they can just dip their toes in with this first book and see how they like it.
Exactly. And then if they enjoy it, they can always go back and read the rest of the series.
Okay, cool. Well, that's good to know. All right, so we've talked a lot about Before the Coffee Gets Cold. We've explored the themes, the writing style, the characters, but ultimately I think it comes down to this. Is it a book that you would recommend to others?
I would. Yeah, I think it's a really special book. It's not for everyone, like we've said, but for the right reader, I think it can be a really powerful and moving experience.
And you know what? I think one of the things that I'm taking away from this conversation is that it's okay to read books that are quiet, that are introspective, that don't necessarily have a lot of action or excitement.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes those are the books that stay with us the longest, you know?
Yeah, I think you're right. Because they make us think, they make us feel, and they challenge us to see the world in a new way.
Exactly. And I think Before the Coffee Gets Cold is definitely one of those books.
So if you're looking for a book that will make you think, that will make you feel, that will stay with you long after you finished reading it, then I think you should definitely give Before the Coffee Gets Cold a try. It just might be the perfect book for you.
I think so too.
It makes you think about, all those time travel stories where they're always trying to change the past, fix things.
Right. Yeah. Like
Okay.
going back and killing baby Hitler or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this book is saying, like, what if we just accepted the past for what it is?
Yeah. What if we just tried to understand it, to learn from it, to make peace with it?
Yeah. And maybe in doing that, we can actually change the present.
Exactly. Because the past, it shapes us.
Oh, yeah. It makes us who we are.
Right. And so even if we can't literally go back and change things, maybe we can change the way we think about the past. And maybe that's enough to change the present.
Yeah, I like that. It's like you're not actually changing the events themselves, but you're changing your relationship to them.
Exactly. And I think that's a really powerful idea because it means that we're not just stuck with the past. We can always choose how we interpret it, how we let it affect us.
So it's kind of empowering in a way.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it gives us agency. It says that we're not just victims of our past. We can choose how we want to move forward.
Okay, so I'm really starting to see the appeal of this book now. It's not just a time travel story. It's a story about, like, self-discovery and growth and healing.
Right, exactly. It's about learning to let go of the things we can't change and focusing on the things we can.
So for our listeners out there who are maybe still on the fence about this book, I mean, what would you say to them?
I would say if you're looking for a book that will make you think, that will make you feel, that will challenge you in ways you might not expect, then I think you should definitely give Before the Coffee Gets Cold a try.
It's not your typical time travel story, that's for sure.
No, it's definitely not. But that's what makes it so special, I think. It's a quiet book, it's a thoughtful book, and it's a book that will stay with you long after you've finished reading it.
All right, well, I'm sold. I'm definitely adding this to my to-be-read list.
Yeah.
And for those of you listening at home, if you're looking for something a little bit different, something a little bit special, then I highly recommend checking out Before the Coffee Gets Cold.
It just might be the perfect book for you.
It just might be. And you know what? Even if you don't love it, I think it's a book that will make you think, and that's always a good thing.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Before the Coffee Gets Cold.
It was my pleasure. And until next time, happy reading.